Hey, we're,
Hey,
we're live.
you're back.
Calling Chris Anderson out there in the ether someplace. Where are you?
Yeah, still in the Pyrenees and enjoying life. Yes, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Still on Shelter Island. Although actually we recorded this a week ago, so I'm probably not
So
on
it's a
Shelter Island
recording to get
anymore.
ready for the re-record. Okay, yeah.
It's all part of the massive Ghost Army deception plan where Chris and Rick appear to be on screen or someplace, and they're actually miles away
In their basements.
doing something far less glamorous. Right. Welcome, everybody, to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. Chris and I may not know where we are or even when we are, but usually at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays, we're here to talk about history. And today we've got a great encore episode on Britain's World War II Spymaster. And Chris, you know who we have to thank before we get to that?
No, I do not. You, of course,
Ye-
and our
Oh,
guests, our top
well,
shelf.
well, I thank you. But yes, our top shelf patrons is exactly right. And all of our patrons on Patreon, anybody who has donated on Patreon, thank you for helping keep history alive. Maybe that's overstating it,
Absolutely.
but keeping the history taps flowing here, we really appreciate it. And a reminder, you can find about upcoming shows and see all of our past shows at our website, historyhappyhour.net. Chris, our guest this week is somebody who we've had on the show several times and is we're really big fans of.
Yes. Helen's book Spymaster was really well received in the UK, and it's coming out in paperback, which means it's a perfect summer beach time read.
And if you don't remember or didn't see the show, now's your chance to find out all about it. Ready to go, Chris?
I'm ready to go. Brrr, bing.
The bar is open.
The bar is open, so what's on tap?
What's on tap? Well, over the course of the summer, some of you may remember that I was spending an awful lot of time reading about and studying about Special Operations Executive in preparation for what I hope will be a tour in the future. And one of the things that really struck me when I was doing my research was that there was a man named Thomas Kendrick, who would appear in almost every search, every mention, every mission, every agent. And sometimes it was, but they're all like these little brief appearances. And I was really curious about who this Thomas Kendrick was because I'd never really heard of him or knew very much about him. And fortunately, before it took me forever to figure that out, our good friend and History Happy Hour alumni, Helen Fry, Dr. Helen Fry, had come out with her new book, Spymaster, which is a biography of, I'd like to call him the Where's Waldo of the espionage war during World War II. So we're going to talk to Helen about Thomas Kendrick. So Helen, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
You're like a veteran now, so we like that.
Right. We've discussed this with some other guests. When you get to 5 appearances, you may get a jacket from us, but
So write faster.
It depends on how world famous we are at that point.
Better than the T-shirt, then.
Yeah,
Than the
exactly.
It might be a very thin jacket. It may look like a T-shirt, but we'll call it a jacket. But so you're working your way there.
Yes. So Helen, we're going to get down into the details of this, but just to kind of set the scene, who's Thomas Kendrick?
Well, Thomas Kendrick's a guy who spent nearly 40 years in the shadows of British intelligence, and there are links to American intelligence as well, as we'll probably discuss a bit later. But he lived in that kind of shadowy world, in the world of the Secret Intelligence Service, otherwise known as MI6. And until just over a decade ago, MI6 didn't officially exist, although most of us suspected it did exist. And he was part of that world, and very little is known about him. The official MI6 history has just a couple of paragraphs.
Right.
And those kind of characters are probably going to turn out to be the most interesting if they've just got a few lines about them in official histories. They're the ones perhaps we should try and look at.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I just thought it was so intriguing that this name it would just pop up briefly and then you'd wonder, but everybody, he's everywhere.
Yeah.
So
Really, really significant character, and at the heart of British intelligence and the Anglo-American intelligence relationship from the Second World War. But his intelligence career starts towards the end of the Boer War. He had an American father, so that will be of interest to your American audience, and a South African mother. But he was born in British South Africa. But I love the way that he begins his espionage career, his intelligence career, very early on, at the end of the Boer War. So we're talking about 1900, and he's cycling behind enemy lines for the British forces for a bicycle brigade. I just think that's great, isn't it?
So he's down in South.
Dangerous.
This is down in South Africa in the Boer War, and the British are fighting the South African troops, and he's there. He is South African born, but or South African father, but obviously loyal to the British, and he's chugging along on his bicycle behind enemy lines, picking up what he can. How old is he at that point? He's probably
so he's 19 years old.
Wow.
So he's part of a small group that are sent behind the lines, and it gives him his taste of espionage. Really, I think that would mark out very quickly after the Boer War, when he moves into traveling around the region, and particularly into German occupied areas, very quickly moving into the diamond mining industry as a stockbroker and traveling with international links. And I love that, because what I discovered during the research, something I wasn't expecting, was that many of the figures that go on to found the British intelligence services, or the British Secret Bureau as it first was in 1909, before that, many of them were involved in espionage, intelligence in South Africa. And they were moving in and out of the diamond mining industry, or working undercover, and with those international connections. And you mentioned, Chris, the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, which of course wouldn't be founded or established until the Second World War. But one key figure you picked up on, I know when you read the book, was Vera Atkins.
Yeah.
And Vera Atkins, who went on to send the French agents, men and women actually, behind enemy lines in the Second World War. How many of us knew that her father and her grandfather worked for Kendrick in South Africa? And Vera Atkins, actually, when she wanted to get her British nationality, Kendrick was one of the 3 referees that had known her since she was a small child.
Well, I thought it was just...
the connections.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing to me because she had a reputation for being so reserved and quiet and very protective of herself, and not very outgoing or boisterous. And then you read in your book that she's known Kendrick for all these years, and they're close family friends. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think it was about kind of that environment of South Africa that produced all of these people that later went into espionage? I mean, because there's so many connections that you make.
Yeah, the figures you've got, just to name one, because the people are probably thinking, well, which figures? Who?
Yeah.
Claude Dancy, he's there, and he goes on later to become the deputy head of MI6.
Yep.
You also have Alexander Scotland, the nephew of George Bernard Shaw, who goes on to work with the Intelligence Corps. It's not clear that he ever worked for MI6. That's disputed. He himself, in his memoirs, said he went on to work for MI5. Again, that's sometimes disputed in intelligence circles. But you have Kendrick's own brother-in-law, Rex Pearson, who, again, would spend nearly 40 years of his career in MI6, or Secret Intelligence Service, and he would, in the First World War and the Second World War, he was the pigeon man. So he would send pigeons behind enemy lines, hoping that the messages would come back, which of course they did. So you've got, and there are many other figures, the Joel brothers at the heart of the diamond mining industry. They go on, we know from the official MI6 history, to work for MI6. So they are moving in these circles, gaining intelligence, because Germany's a threat in this period. And I'm not sure whether we kind of realize that even before 1909, Germany in the years before were emerging as a threat. And in South Africa, it was evident that they had new kinds of guns that they were developing, and that's what we were essentially spying on. I mean, it was nothing like the technology that it would become in the Second World War. You think of Germany as this technological giant, developing it in the Second World War, but it was already a threat prior to the First World War. And the intelligence on the German threat is not coming, well, it does come from within Europe, but it also comes from within South Africa, and that's where Kendrick is at the heart of it. So he's forging connections and building a network already of agents that are working for him prior to the First World War. And they would go on to work for him for pretty much, you know, throughout most of the first half of the 20th century. Vera Atkins' family would move back to Romania, and they would be spying along the Danube, for example, after the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. So I love that. It's just so fascinating, these new connections.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's something, you know, it strikes me thinking about this, that in espionage and other secret activities, some of the most important people tend to be people who are kind of, I'll call them multinational, that are born in one place. They're born in South Africa or Austria or Poland or someplace, and they've maybe become naturalized British or American or something else. But there's a fluidity or a I don't know if it's just a way of thinking when you kind of master multiple languages and have already kind of interacted with different cultures, maybe that lends itself to espionage.
Well, maybe it does. I mean, that's not something I've studied in detail, except, of course, one of the threads that comes through most books about spies, intelligence, or whatever that secret world, is that the need for linguists. And someone like Kendrick, who already had international connections, and it would be worth saying at this point, we've mentioned that his father was American. He emigrated to South Africa, to Cape Town, and he purchased the Hotel Metropole in the 1890s for £16,000. So what would that be in dollars? What, something like $25,000 back then? So it was known as the smartest. It was the top hotel in Cape Town. It was the Ritz of South Africa. And so Kendrick was used to moving in high society circles. So his parents, I haven't been able to look much at them. They're kind of very much in the background and very little about them. But you do wonder again, what are they doing? I don't know if they were involved in any kind of intelligence work, but Kendrick is, as a young man, is moving with ease in those circles, and that becomes crucial for his own career in the 1920s and 30s. He's incredibly relaxed, really comfortable in the circles, and he's very charismatic. He loves people. He's absolutely perfect for human espionage. He's got a good sense of humor, but you never ever knew, and this is what the grandchildren said to me, none of us in the family ever knew his political views. They just didn't really know what he thought about anything. He was very friendly and so interested in people. He loved cricket and rugby, and I suppose that masks anyone thinking about what's his view on things in actual fact.
Well, I loved it in your book, though, when you say that the kids found one of his old suitcases upstairs after and they had some really fun toys to play with when they were going through the
they had a spy camera, a Minox spy camera,
right,
and a few escape gadgets and that kind of thing in his suitcase.
How cool is that?
And there were a whole lot of papers as well after he died, which the family were bound, of course, to, I don't know if they got a knock on the door to say, you know, who got any papers, but they knew that they had to destroy them, which of course is not quite the thing a historian wants to hear.
No.
So Helen, I mean, we want to kind of get into the meat of the Second World War, but just to kind of bring us up to speed, he's starts out in intelligence work during the Boer War. What does he do into the Great War, and how does that lead into him getting to Vienna?
So in the Great War, in the first part of the Great War, he's actually processing German prisoners of war. The armistice comes in South Africa in July 1915, and after that he's involved in counter-espionage work, really, and as a sort of administrative governor, sifting the civilians and the forces to see, if there are any German spies amongst them. So really security measures. But then he transfers to France, where his brother-in-law Rex Pearson is, sending pigeons behind enemy lines. Kendrick is involved in counter-espionage again, running agents behind enemy lines into Belgium, and then processing prisoners of war, around at least 5,000 of them, around Arras at the end of the war. And then he's posted to Cologne in Germany. And from there, of course, you've got the Bolshevik threat across Europe after the Russian Revolution in 1917. And what the Bolsheviks are doing, and this might be new to your listeners, is that they are sending spies and agents into the armies of Europe that are disbanding and trying to turn them towards communism and Bolshevik thinking and trying to get them to destabilize democracies in Western Europe. So, I mean, absolutely fascinating. So that's what Kendrick's doing. He's spying on that, essentially. And then in 1925, he's posted to Vienna. And Vienna is described in the MI6 official history as, in this period, 1920s and 30s, the most important station for MI6 in that period. It's the period, this is crucial. It's at the crossing between East and West.
And so for Kendrick to have that posting, he's obviously highly regarded by people in the field, and he must be a pretty significant person.
Yeah.
We don't know, to be given that job. Yeah.
You cannot, it's too important to leave this in the hands of an incompetent officer. And in fact, there is an incompetent officer. He overtakes. So Forbes Dennis, who we know worked out of Vienna and then later at Kitzbühel and was involved. His wife was involved with Fleming and stuff. He left in 1924, and the unnamed officer that took over him was so incompetent and had sort of all kinds of issues, not least he had to keep going to a particular clinic for particular diseases.
Illness. Yes.
So completely, we'll say no more. So Kendrick is sent. They absolutely have to get this right, because Russia is the threat in this period. But not only that, as I uncovered in the files, and they're deeply embedded, it took me years to find this stuff. In Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, there's a development of chemical weapons. Fascinating stuff, that he's monitoring. So Vienna is crucial because you've got spies moving. It's the center of espionage now. Spies of all those countries, including our own, moving in and out. Really, really crucial. So he's got his networks completely across Czechoslovakia, Hungary, into Romania, right up eventually after the Nazi regime comes to power, right up as far as Danzig. He's also sending agents into Italy. He's got a huge brief and a very, very important one.
Well, and we have a great picture that you sent us, and this is Kendrick at the time in Vienna, and he's very much the gentleman, isn't he, Helen?
Yeah, in Vienna, he is building his network. And one of the ways he's doing that, yes, he's got journalists who are working for him, but he's moving also in high society. He's Roman Catholic. And in a Catholic country like Austria, that might be one of the most significant reasons he would be able to move with ease in a very conservative Catholic country. And we soon find amongst his guests, because every week he's hosting cocktail parties with his wife in their apartment in Vienna. He is undercover as the British passport officer, but not doing much passport work. So he's having this wonderful time and enjoying Viennese high society. He's mixing with intellectuals, with musicians, any of whom could be part of his network, or at least if the crunch comes at any moment, particularly with the rise of Hitler, these are people he could draw on, not only for intelligence, but as we know later, to hide Jews. And there's a whole raft of aristocrats across Europe that actually help him. And I again, that's a really fascinating area.
And one of the things that was really fascinating is that he's married, and his wife has absolutely no idea what he's doing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm still hoping that one day we'll work out between us, myself and the family, when his wife Nora knew about his work. Was it as late as the funeral, when the unusual the men in trench coats and trilby hats turn up, and they're sat in the back row of the church, and the grandson says to his mother, this is Kendrick's daughter, "Oh, who are those men?" And she said, "Oh, they're from the British Secret Service." I mean, it's like something out of a John le Carré novel. John le Carré hasn't invented this. This is the world that Kendrick inhabited. And you just wonder, at what point did Nora, the daughter was certainly by the funeral knew, but as far as Nora was concerned, who was a perfect hostess at these cocktail parties, and high society companions when they went to the State Opera, again, every week they went to the Vienna New Year concert. I don't think I can ever watch the New Year concert in Vienna, which is on the television every year now, without thinking of Kendrick. He was always there with his wife. Now, he would go to the British Passport Office. She probably thought that's what he's doing, passport work. But of course he wasn't.
Well, but
and then, in the Second World War, he's back in uniform. He was in uniform in the First World War, and they were married. So, if he hasn't told her, does she have any idea? At what point does she find out?
And was she German? Was she German?
Yeah.
At least partly German, or all German? I don't remember.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
She was. Yeah, he met her in South Africa in the German-occupied region. He worked for her father. Her father was a German businessman. Now, some of my South African friends say she was Norma Wrecke, W-E-C-K-E, and they said that's actually a Jewish surname. Now, I'm not 100% sure that it's totally a Jewish surname, so we're not sure if she has Jewish roots, but she's certainly German. And Kendrick's brother-in-law Rex marries Nora's sister, so two sisters marry the two friends. Okay. It's wonderful, really. So she was German.
So Helen, Kendrick is in Vienna. He's doing this important work against the communists, and he's there as Austria and the rest of Europe kind of descends into madness. And the threat is no longer the communists; it's the fascists and then the Nazis. And he has his intelligence work, but then you alluded to this, but he works in the passport office, and he gets involved in a lot of other important work, and you call him, and I think rightly, the Oscar Schindler of Vienna. So what's that all about? What is he doing? What's happening? How does that become part of his portfolio?
Well, we know that he had a lot of Jewish friends that he'd built up in the area. And, of course, all the intelligence during the 30s was pointing to the fact that Hitler really was a threat to Austria. The question was not if, but when. And it was thought that Hitler might invade in 1934 when it was very politically turbulent, but he didn't. It was March 1938. And in the beginning of that year, his secretaries suggested that they had one last party. They knew it was coming. By February, they absolutely knew it was a matter of just a couple of weeks. And, of course, they also knew that the Jewish community would be immediately at threat. And what happened within 24 hours of the Anschluss, as it's known, as Hitler's annexing Austria, the passport office was now chaos. You had hundreds of Jews queuing around the building, down the street and around the corner, literally hundreds. And some days they reckoned 700, 800, 900. And then they come back the next day because they hadn't got through the first day. And so he's thrown into this human crisis catastrophe, and he embarks on a humanitarian mission to save as many Jews as he can. And we know the official reports say he saved up to 200 Jews a day. Amazing legacy, working 12 to 15 hours, issuing passports and visas, but it wasn't that straightforward. And what he found he had to do, because the British government was tightening up very quickly, He started to forge documents, marriage certificates, forge fake baptisms. He was working with the church next door, and all this kind of thing, anything to get Jews out. And some of them were sent to Namibia, Kenya, that we've just found out. I mean, it's an extraordinary legacy. And I think the most important thing here is he wasn't just doing his job.
Right. So I wanted to get it. He does this largely on his own initiative. I mean, he's not told by anybody in the British government, go save these people. He does it himself.
Yeah, and he's actually smuggling Jews out at one point through Yugoslavia on false documents and on temporary visas. He was no longer allowed. From May 1938, the British government said, no more temporary visas for 1 month. 1 month sort of holiday visas or whatever. They were banned because they knew that was a way of getting Jews in. He ignored it. And he was bringing Jews out through Yugoslavia. The Foreign Office absolutely slapped his wrists. He got a real, it was a risk. But then there's another incident you probably remember in the book when he stands up to the stormtroopers.
Oh, yeah, that's a wonderful story.
He comes out one day, he looks out of the window and he sees a group of Jews scrubbing the street with the bucket of acid solution, stormtroopers and brown shirts jeering at them. There's a pregnant woman there. There's a surgeon, and he kind of makes a comment or thinks, that surgeon, how many lives has that surgeon saved? He storms out down the steps and he kicks over the bucket and he looks straight at those stormtroopers and he says, not on my patch. Well, they could have arrested him.
Yeah.
And he had no diplomatic immunity. Passport control officers at that point had no diplomatic immunity. And, you just think he's at his heart, there's a moral compass.
Yeah.
Here is a spymaster who would have killed for his country to protect secrets. We know that in the Second World War. But here he is with a really strong moral compass and didn't have to do it. He could have taken a different path, and he was not just doing his job. That's really, really important. And I'd like to see him recognised at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem.
Well, I was gonna ask you that later. Yeah. How many? Do you have any? Does anybody have any idea how many people he saved?
No. The best estimates, the newspapers that covered some of this story, place it at over 10,000. But it's really, really hard to say because, if he didn't record the fake documents because he obviously he's not allowed to be doing this kind of stuff. And one person I will mention because it might relate to our audience, he helped Lord George Weidenfeld, who went on to found Weidenfeld and Nicholson Publishing House. And I interviewed George. He said, and his stuff in his own autobiography, he was 19 years old and he came before Kendrick with his mother with these papers, and Kendrick read them and said, I'm really sorry you don't qualify. You don't qualify for emigration. His mother burst into tears. I mean, do you see this chaos outside, the doors outside? And Kendrick snatches the papers back, stamps them, and says to George, just get out of the country. And George said to me, he's passed away in the last couple of years, but he said to me when I interviewed him, what happened to the man who saved my life? And that man had gone on to create this incredible, well-known household publishing house. And for 70 years, he never knew until we had that conversation what happened to the man who saved his life. I found that a really kind of tingly moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I suppose, I imagine he never said why he did this. And I mean, we can imagine the reasons of conscience why, but there's, the stories that the history books often tell is of all these people denied visas, that there were plenty of passport officers for the United States and probably other ones for Britain and ones for other countries who were saying, no, the rules don't allow this, you can't come in, and not saving people. So it's very remarkable that he totally took it upon himself after having been in government service at this point for 20 years almost, took it upon himself to simply, or I guess almost 30, to say no, I'm going to make this decision and do it differently. No clues about the thought process or his interior thinking.
Well, there are a whole raft of spies and diplomats across Europe, British spies and diplomats, who do help Jews out. They are part of his network. They're working undercover for MI6, but they are pretty much isolated and on their own. So they're working on their own initiative. Frank Foley in Berlin, there was Arthur Dowden, there were a number of them, Smallbones. So I think, that needs to, there has been a book on Frank Foley, but there needs to be more on some of the others too. They also need recognizing, but Kendrick, they were pretty isolated because this was a crisis moment. And so he had to act on his own initiative. And one of the stories that came out during my research, and I have to say this has taken nearly 20 years, over 20 years to write this biography, because he's been in the shadows. It's that he left very little paper trail, well, virtually none actually. So he's working on his own initiative, and the story comes out, and I think only he did it. They had a notice. He put a notice in the back of a car, chauffeur-driven car, that said "Corps Diplomatique," and in the back were a couple of Jews, and was getting them out over the border. And he knew, couldn't do it too often because it was risky, but he knew pretty much those border guards were not allowed to stop a diplomatic car. Well, I think he's the only person that did that. I've never heard of that story before. And so he's thinking anything to rescue people. And he's also rescuing communists that he was spying on in the early 30s, because they're also at risk.
So he has an ordinary day at the office and saves a couple thousand people from the Nazis, but then on the side he's maintaining this espionage network. So what's he doing with that part of his life while all this is going on?
Well, the files are quite slim on the 1930s generally. Not much has been released, but we do know that he's running his spy networks, particularly into Czechoslovakia. That's really important. I'd like eventually to do a bit more work on this, because he has links, agents working out of Brno and right across Czechoslovakia. In my book, you'll remember there's a photograph of a passport of Willy Bondy, was one of his agents. In the 30s, he, from the stamps with passport, still survives with the family. He only goes into Austria twice in the 1930s. But in 1938, between June and August, he's going in every few days, just for a day, and he's passing intelligence to Kendrick. Kendrick got his whole family out. He decided not to go with them. He would stay behind and continue to pass intelligence to the British, but he ultimately died in Auschwitz in 1941 for helping the British. An incredibly brave man. Yeah. And there are stories like that, but we don't really know the identities of the network. That's protected, I guess, forever, pretty much.
But it all kind of comes a cropper for him in Vienna. So how does his time in Vienna come to an end? Because there's a bit of a sensation with this, right?
Well, two very dramatic chapters where he's betrayed by a double agent. And that's what it took. I mean, they're one of those dastardly double agents, and not one of ours, not one of our British agents. It does make a change, doesn't it? Wasn't Kim Philby. Although he crosses paths with Kim Philby, and you have to read that in the book. The audience, we'll have to read about that in the book. What's going on in Vienna in 33, 34 with Kendrick and Kim Philby. But yeah, it becomes really serious. And the Germans know, there's a price on his head. The Germans know there is a top spymaster in Vienna. They just can't work out who it is. And at the end of the day, he's dubbed the elusive Englishman. But double agent betrays him, and he is arrested. Kendrick's manager at the office is arrested first on the Friday. This is in August 1938. And the alarm bells are ringing. Kendrick and his wife leave early, a day or so later, and they're just about to cross the border at Freilassing. And of course, the Gestapo turned up at the apartment in Vienna. They're not there, and all alert. He is arrested near the border, doesn't quite make it out. So dramatically, he's sent back on his own with the Gestapo. 4 days of Soviet-style interrogation, pretty horrendous. I mean, there are photographs of him when he's expelled and he's back on British soil. This photograph, I love this photograph, it's sort of action photograph. But there's another one with his face full on, where you can really see the strain of the interrogations that he's had. I mean, we're talking about 8 hours in a row, non-stop, at night, bright lights, very little food. You get the picture, pretty horrendous for him. But for the Secret Intelligence Service is panic because, you know, they don't know while he's arrested, number one, where he is, although that's soon established, but has he given the network away? The whole, you know, it is described in the MI6 history as the most serious incident to befall MI6 in its first 30 years history. So that will give us an idea of how significant this was.
So, Helen, a couple of questions from the audience coming up. And you talked about working on this for 20 years. And so Catherine Hurst wants to know, when did you really start finally finding information on Kendrick? And I would add to that, I mean, the whole thing about the saving maybe 200 Austrian Jews a day, is that something that anybody knew about before you really started digging it up? No. Or was it really something that you discovered?
Yeah, there's a very brief mention of that, the rescue effort, in Michael Smith's book, which he wrote about Frank Foley. Frank Foley saved, as I said, Berlin's Jews. He was British Passport Office undercover, working for MI6. He was one of Kendrick's colleagues. They were quite close throughout. They served together in the First World War and in Cologne. So there was something there, and that's where I first heard about Kendrick, actually. And I was inspired. I thought, well, if Michael Smith, who's a very dear friend, a wonderful historian, I thought, well, if he's been able to write a whole book about Frank Foley, surely it's possible to do the same for Kendrick. I thought, this man, Kendrick, deserves to be recognised. But it's taken 20 years because I've had pieces coming together across that period, and I've written books in between whilst this was on the back, well, not on the back burner, I was actively. And so sometimes when you give a talk, someone comes out of the woodwork with a bit of extra information, which is a lead. But it has literally been 20 years of interviews with people, with personnel that worked for him, for people that he saved, and also just literally trawling paper for days on end, you know.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do know.
Chris, can I ask
absolutely
Wally's question as well here? So, Wally Morrison says, what was the chain of command? Who did he report to? Was he closely monitored? And did his superiors know of his work to save Jews?
So the chain of command, so his ultimate boss was the head of MI6, known as C. All signed in green ink.
Okay.
C.
Here we go.
C for Chief. Well,
I have
it was
green ink.
Mansfield Cumming, the first chief, of course, who signed C in green ink, and apparently it's still done to this day. And every now and again, if there's a MI6 doesn't release its files, as you guys will know, but the audience may. I often get asked this: have I used the MI6 files? No, I haven't. I haven't been lucky enough to be given any access. But occasionally, in MI5 files, you'll see a note from MI6, and occasionally, and in some of the Bletchley Park files, it's signed C at the bottom in green ink, and you think, and it is always exciting when you inadvertently turn the page and you see, I don't know, it's just something really quite exciting about that. It's a bit kind of James Bond in many ways.
Right.
So he reported ultimately to the head of MI6. He was also in touch with Valentine Vivian, a key figure in counter-espionage at MI6, and he was very closely working too with Claude Dancy, who in the Second World War was deputy head of MI6. And of course their friendship and links go way back to the Boer War period, or just after.
So now, just his life in Vienna, that would have been a remarkable achievement, a remarkable life. But he comes back to Britain, the war starts, and he gets involved in another program, which, I think rightly, as you point out, is equally as important as what happens at Bletchley Park to winning the war. So what is it exactly that Kendrick gets up to next?
He is setting up from scratch, with no blueprint, a unit that would bug the conversations of German prisoners of war. And I think we may have talked about this before. I can't remember. Did we just speak about MI9 before? But I wrote a book, a sort of part one to this, The Walls Have Ears, which is the history of this unit. Again, the first person to write the British side of this story, and the story of the secret listeners who would work for Kendrick, that would be listening to the conversations of thousands of German prisoners of war and eventually Hitler's top commanders. So Kendrick is working from scratch to set up this unit, knowing that it's not just the signals intelligence we need and the cracking of the Enigma codes, hugely significant, I mean, absolutely vital to the outcome of the war, that we're eavesdropping, but we're also cracking the Enigma codes and into Hitler's communications. We know that, the legacy of Bletchley Park, but not everything is coming out through those means. So we also need, again, it's good old human intelligence. Right. Kendrick knows that the prisoners of war, oh, wonderful, you've got my book up. Yeah. The prisoners of war are going to have important information that they're not going to give up in interrogation. So he wires 3 secret sites for sound and collects intelligence. His personnel gather intelligence, which I've shown made a material difference and has now been recognised by Historic England here in the United Kingdom. It's one of our most prestigious institutions, has now accepted that this operation of Kendrick's, the work of the secret listeners, was on a par with the code breaking at Bletchley Park. So that's really good to know. But that's, again, as a result of careful analysis, ploughing through thousands and thousands of pages at the National Archives and really sifting the intelligence myself and working carefully on how. It's all very well to work through these huge files, but did all this information have any impact on the outcome of the war? So that, again, has been a major piece of my work. Right. And what I've done in Spymaster, in Kendrick's biography, I've got a little bit about the background, but I couldn't repeat everything that's in The Walls Have Ears. Mm. So I've done a deeper dive into the intelligence significance, and it just blows your mind what this man achieved through his unit, working after Pearl Harbor very closely with American intelligence officers that come over to the United Kingdom. So really, really, he's at the heart of Anglo-American intelligence cooperation as well.
Well, and I think, I mean, we've talked about this before, and by the way, you can listen to our earlier interview with Helen if you go onto the
check out our on YouTube. We have youtube.com/history happy hour, and you can find, I think that was show 45. That's my memory there. Show 45. We've got all the numbers.
Oh, you're impressive. Yeah.
Woo. Well, I think.
Just to refresh everybody's memory, though, and I think when most people think of interrogation and human intelligence, they picture, Germans and light bulbs shined in eyes and all that kind of thing. Kendrick approaches his interrogation in a really unusual way. What is it that he does to get such valuable information before we get into the results of it?
Yeah, so if you think about it, it's all about the psychology. Kendrick had spent a lifetime really understanding German culture, and the intelligence services believed it was possible to understand a culture, that there is a particular psyche of our cultures, that we think differently, and that there was a particular German psyche, as there would be, probably if anyone's looking at a British eccentric psyche, I don't know. But it was really understanding those prisoners of war. So no roughing up an interrogation, against the Geneva Convention, nothing reliable. But if you understand, how are you going to get information, and more particularly from Hitler's top commanders, if you charm them, if you give them a life of relative luxury in a stately home, if you pamper to their egos, understanding Hitler's top commanders in particular, highly full of self-importance and huge egos,
Yeah.
pamper to that, and then all you need to do is put microphones everywhere, plant pots, billiards table. Yes.
Right.
A tree outside.
Luke Skywalker behind you or whatever. Yeah, you didn't.
I heard what you said about my mother.
That's it, yeah.
The irony is this is wired back to the M room. M is the room with all the equipment, the recording equipment, and there are teams of secret listeners who are German Jewish refugees.
Yeah, I thought that was
and
wonderful.
Austrian, who have fled Nazi Germany, Austria. Well, Austria was part of Germany now, wasn't it? But so we've got Germans and Austrians, vast majority of them Jewish, working for Kendrick as secret listeners. So it's almost come like sort of full circle. Yeah. And they are recording. But then, of course, he had intelligence officers. A third of his personnel were women. They're all doing incredibly interesting jobs, as I've uncovered through my unique research. It's taken a long time, but what we've got is a really exciting understanding of what Kendrick's achieved. And it's tri-services, again, very new, to have Army, Navy and Air Intelligence cooperating together. So he's not just an administrative buff. He's somebody who understands how to get the best out of his personnel and working together, how to get the best intelligence out of the prisoners. You just wonder if we hadn't had Kendrick at that time. In fact, somebody wrote a review on Amazon, I don't know who it was, who said Kendrick's legacy is immeasurable.
Right.
And I thought that probably sums it up in many ways. It is immeasurable. He's one of our most, if not the most important wartime commander in actual fact. And that's not my words. That's, again, another review. That was a review in a newspaper.
But it's also striking, sort of what an amazing heart and mind, right? I mean, so he's an out of the box thinker. He's a person with incredible verve, and he's also got this moral compass in his heart. These are not three things that go together in too many people. And of course, he's really good at keeping a secret. Just ask Nora, right? So there's four things, and to find them all in one person who then just says, well, I don't need to say much about myself, and I'm just going to keep, I'm not going to write my memoirs, and I'm not going to publicize my role, and I'm just going to keep it all quiet. That's pretty amazing.
Well, he knew he had to keep it secret. I mean, he was there from the beginning of the Foundation of Intelligence Services, and just knew that he took a lifetime of secrets to the grave that are incredibly difficult to uncover. I mean, I probably haven't uncovered more than half of them, if that. And a couple of chapters on Rudolf Hess, he's Hess's minder at one point. You think this is just incredible. This man, he's there with Frank Foley and a mysterious Mr. Barnes. He's working with Fleming. There's a picture outside Latimer House of the Naval Intelligence Team, and Ian Fleming is in there, as is another character. And I'll leave your audience to have a look at see who else is it. Oh my gosh, what's he doing in that photograph? But yeah, fascinating, highly top secret history. It reminds me of an anecdote of one of the intelligence officers when he first started, because Kendrick had his headquarters at Latimer House. He started at Latimer House. Deverson came before him, and Kendrick slid a pistol across the desk and said to him, if you ever betray what happens here, you do the decent thing, and if you don't, I will. And you think, oh my gosh, he would have killed to protect the secrets of the intelligence operations he's involved in. And yet, he's a man who has these charming lunches in the middle of the wartime with cocktails, but that's intelligence was done over cocktails, and that charm. People loved him, and he got the best. He understood how to get men and women working together, but also how to get intelligence from those prisoners without touching them.
Helen, I mean, one of the I just want to mention really quickly to Catherine Hurst. She'd asked, "Do you know?" Here we go. Show this. Whether any of the listeners to the German officers had earlier been helped to escape by Kendrick, and you do make a connection. Yeah.
Yes, there were.
Yeah.
There were Austrian Jews who were helped out, who became secret listeners. Yes, we know that.
Oh, sorry.
Wow. And one other question I wanted to ask you: there are a lot of amazing accomplishments that he achieves with this unit and the intelligence that's gathered. So we don't have time to talk about all of them, or even
You
half
only
of
have
them.
2 books that you have to buy and read. So
No, there are more than that.
Get on it.
But just talk about one of the achievements of this intelligence gathering. One thing that they discovered or revealed that really kind of altered the course of events.
Well, I suppose it has to be the big one that the audience will relate to quickest and easiest, and that are the V weapons. And I do a deeper dive into that in my Spymaster book. You know, we cannot underestimate just how close we came to potentially losing the war by losing the tech war. So I was told, and I've probably said this before, that in intelligence circles as late as February 1945, we could have lost the war. We're into Germany. The Allies are into Germany. We could have lost the war because Germany could have won the tech war if we didn't have Bletchley Park and Kendrick's 3 centres of intelligence gathering, the microphones in walls kind of thing. Yeah. So the V weapons, I trace the link between the discovering the bug conversations from Hitler's top commanders. They are the closest to Hitler. They know the top secrets of the Nazi regime, but they spill the beans one day after the fall of Stalingrad in 1943. They're thoroughly depressed. They start leaking information to each other. You know, we've lost the war, and General von Thomas says, no, we haven't. We've got the V weapons. We've got the secret weapon. And there is a line, there is absolutely, and I've traced it uniquely, a line between those bug conversations. And I'm the first to do so. I was challenged in the early days, but I think it's now accepted, which is great after all this work. That and the bombing of Peenemünde in August 1943. With the help of the RAF Medmenham interpreters, you have the RAF flying over Peenemünde in Germany, and really now realizing, this is a secret weapon stuff. And it knocks out Hitler's program for 9 months. And without it, we couldn't have landed on D-Day beaches. And I think this stuff could have been turned on the troops coming up through Italy. So that's a very brief resume and argument, but we're also discovering material on V3. Don't worry, they're bombing our V1, V2 sites, but we've got the V3 coming. Then the atomic bomb program. This stuff is so vital.
And these are all things that you have made direct connections between.
Yeah,
the program that Kendrick set up, right? And
I'm the only historian who has analysed this. I came to this with no preconceived ideas. And when I did a deeper dive into the intelligence for the Spymaster book, so having done The War Without Ears, I'm not expecting to find this stuff. And what I did find is that one of the prisoners in July 1943 said there is a plan, Hitler has a plan to invade Britain in September 43 with the help of the V weapons. That's how close it was. And I'm shocked to be reading this stuff. That doesn't mean Hitler could have succeeded, but he was really close to making that stuff operational. And I do stand by this and say that without this intelligence, we've got to understand it absolutely could have nearly cost us the war. But one thing I do want to add to that, again, we think of this massive intelligence, and we're talking about 75,000 transcripts of conversations and intelligence reports. It's an industrial intelligence gathering organization that's working closely with Bletchley Park, with the other intelligence agencies. But it's not just winning, and this is what I realized in Spymaster, it's not just winning the war, the intelligence war against Nazi Germany. By 1943, Russia has emerged again as a long-term threat. And what you've got in these bug conversations, inadvertently, those generals in particular, but not only the generals, are giving up information about Russia. the Russian fighting capability, new weapons. There's one conversation which says that Russia is a month ahead at least of Germany in its atomic program. I didn't know that. I mean, of course, it would soon get overtaken. So finally, just to say on this point, what Kendrick's unit has done, I mean, this is why I think his legacy is immeasurable. It's helped materially to win the war against Nazi Germany. Absolutely. Without it, we could well have lost. And it's also prepared us for the Cold War and the new threat, long-term threat from Russia. And I mean, it just blows my mind what this man has achieved through this unit.
Before we let you go, Helen, and we don't want to let you go, but I know, Chris, you were visiting Kendrick's lair not too long ago when you were prepping for the SOE tour, which we hope which is on the schedule, by the way, of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for next year. If you guys are interested in checking that out, you can sign up at StephenAmbroseHistoricalTours.com. So you visited Latimer House. Chris, tell us a little bit. I mean, let's bring that up. I'm not sure how you want to do it, but
no, I just we were. I actually, after reading Helen's books, I had to see this site. It's a wonderful, very schwanky resort, and it's in gorgeous English countryside, and you come upon it, and it's all still there. Unfortunately, that day they were having a medical conference, so I got shushed out and I stuck my head in the door. But that's the entrance. I know Helen goes and speaks there quite often. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture. Well, there's one picture you can show next, but before you do, just to the left, there's a porch or a patio, and that picture didn't turn out so well, but it's a wonderful patio where there was. Helen has some wonderful pictures in her book of some Royal Naval officers on that patio drinking pink gin, which apparently was the favorite drink at the time. But Ian Fleming of James Bond fame is in the picture, and several other people that whose names you and you just you look at the picture and you're like, holy cow, they all knew each other and they drank together and they all stood on that spot, and it's pretty.
And Chris Anderson has stood.
That happens to be That happens to be That's.
Oh, that's great! I love that photograph. On those steps, that's where the picture of the secret listeners was taken, and then another one of Kendrick's army personnel.
So my next life.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's got a sense of place there, hasn't it? The locals call it Spy House. I think they just love it.
It's absolutely,
Helen Fry, thank you, Dr. Helen Fry. Thank you so much for joining us. And to remind our listeners, Helen Fry is the author of the new book, Spymaster, The Man Who Saved MI6. But let us not forget the subject of show number 45, The Walls Have Ears. So, if you're into this topic, you've got a couple of books there that you can look at and some amazing research and stories uncovered that Helen has done. Helen, I think you're a national treasure over there. They should honor you for all of that. So thank you so much. Thanks, and we if you hang on for a moment, Helen, we'll chat with you when the show's over. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Buy the book, guys.
Okay, Chris, we're back here in the current day, and we haven't actually picked a show for next week yet, so we can't tell you what it is, but it's going to be
but
great.
I do know that, but once we go live again, we've had some awesome books to read on our vacation, so we're kind of looking forward to talking about them with our guests and sharing them with our viewers, because I have been reading while at the beach, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, and next week at the end of the show, we will preview once again the great September shows that we're going to do that are live with new guests. And so we're looking forward to that. We're getting all charged up. We'll probably be tanned, fit, ready to roll. It'll be deeply exciting for everyone, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Stay safe.
All right. Have a great day, folks.
All right. Bye.